the power of parallelism in your lyrics. I feel like this is not something we think about as much as we probably should as songwriters, especially when it is actually a tool that's used pretty often in songwriting. If you don't know what parallelism is, basically it's just when you have two things that correspond with one another and there's an obvious connection between the two. It's intentional. It's not just copying or being lazy, it's drawing a parallel between two things in an intentional way. Good example of this would be Star Wars, the prequels versus the original trilogy. So Luke and Anakin both have very some similar things happen, right? They're both born on a desert planet, or they grow up on a desert planet in Tatooine. They both blow up a space station in like their first space mission on a ship. They both lose their hand in battle. They're both tempted by Palpatine, Darth Sidious. So those parallels are intentional, right? George Lucas, the creator of Star Wars, is trying to draw your attention to these parallels, that they're going through some of the same things because one of them ends up making a very different choice than the other. So that's parallelism, right? You're essentially connecting the dots between two things that may otherwise seem totally disconnected. And this is something that shows up in songs sometimes. This can show up in a bunch of different ways. Sometimes this will show up by actually having the last verse of the song be a repeat of the first verse of the song. Or you would have that sometimes after the final chorus of the song, there's actually a part of a verse that comes back that was said earlier in the song. That could maybe be seen as a sort of type of parallelism. At that point, you are actually copying word for word, which happens often. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but it's a form of parallelism. And then sometimes we just have a last verse that just really heavily connects to the first verse. And that's something that Fight for Fighting song 100 Years does very well, where the last verse has a clear allusion or parallel to the first verse that helps to make a central point of this song, really. So let's listen to the first verse and then listen to the last verse and see if we can catch the should be obvious parallelism. But this is the first verse.
I'm 15 for a moment, caught in between 10 and 20, and I'm just dreaming, counting the ways to where you are.
Okay, so that's the first verse. I'm 15 for a moment, caught in between 10 and 20, and I'm just dreaming, counting the ways to where you are. All right, so this is the first part of the first verse. 15 is the youngest age that's mentioned in the song 100 Years. The last verse now goes like this.
I'm 99 for a moment, I'm dying for just another moment, and I'm just dreaming, counting the ways to where you are.
Okay, so both the first part of the first verse and the very last verse that we get ends with the lines, and I'm just dreaming, counting the ways to where you are. And on the surface, you could just say, oh, he just like ran out of lyrics to say, there's not really anything to it. It's just like, all right, we'll sort of bookmark it or bookend it or whatever the term is, where, whatever we start with, we'll end with the same thing. But when you consider the theme of the song of 100 Years, which is essentially this idea that you only have 100 years to live, time is precious. Live the moment while it's here because it's going to be gone soon. One of the great ironies is if you meet any 15-year-old, basically, every 15-year-old kind of wants to be an adult, right? They can't wait to get their license to get freedom. And you don't blame them, right? And I was the same way. We all probably were the same way. Couldn't wait to get our license to get some semblance of freedom. And we kind of look forward to being an adult, right? At 15, who do you think's really cool? Probably like college kids and people who like just started their career, people in their 20s, maybe early 30s, right? That's who you're like, ooh, I want to be that. So when you're 15, you're looking ahead. You actually want to skip ahead in time. But then when you're 99 or when you're just at the end of your life, you would give anything to go back to being 15 again because now you realize at 15 you had all this time, and time is the most precious resource, the only non-renewable resource, right? You can always make more money, you can't always create more time. I guess you could just have better diet and exercise that would help, but whatever our time is, that's what it is. We can't, infinitely buy more. We can't live 300 years or anything like that. So that's one of the great sort of poetic ironies, right? That we're always wanting to be somewhere else. When we're young, we want to be older and taken seriously. When we're older, we'd kill to go back to being younger. And this choice to have those parallel lines draws our attention to that, right? The 15-year-old is just dreaming, counting the ways to where you are, right? Presumably somebody older. And then the person who's 99 is thinking the same thing, but they want to go backwards in time. I think it's Naval Ravikant, I think is his name, but he says something. I think this is him. It might be somebody else. But they said something like, the value of time to someone goes up infinitely at the end of their life, right? He says something like, if you have a $10 billion, at the end of your life, you would give up that $10 billion in a heartbeat just to get like another, I don't know, day to live, another year to live, certainly. You might give that just for another 20 seconds because just the value of time ends up going so high at the end of our lives. And essentially that's sort of what this parallelism gives us, right? This idea that time is what is so important. And at the end of your life, there's that irony that you're like, hey, I wish I could go back to the beginning or just when you're younger. And just to mention the chorus for a moment, just to kind of hone in on how this connects to the central theme, because usually the central theme is in the chorus. The chorus says, 15, there's still time for you, time to buy and time to lose. 15, there's never a wish better than this when you only got 100 years to live. So the idea that it's not that youth is better, right? But time is so valuable. And at 15, you have time. At 15, you're mostly potential energy. You're all potential rather than, actual. By the time you're 99, you're pretty much all actual. All the decisions have already been made. And, you just have the life that you essentially signed up for. So parallelism is a great thing for us to include in our lyrics, especially if there is a point to it. Now, this is a great example of there being a very clear point to it. That's a real irony of life, that the people at their end of their lives love youth, and youth tend to want to be older. Now, youth don't want to be 75. They probably want to be 35 or 30 or 25 or something. But there still is that irony of whatever age you are, there seems to be this, oh, I wish I were younger, oh, I wish I was older, instead of understanding that time is finite and living in the moment and really appreciating the time as we have it. But this is something that can be utilized in any song, right? It doesn't even have to have this deep of a meaning necessarily, but a great tool to use is to think about how you can draw parallels from one part of the song to another part of the song. Maybe you have two different characters and you want to draw parallels between what's happening with one character and what's happening with the other. And just having something where, let's say you have different points of view in different verses. That wouldn't be a common thing to do necessarily, but it's not that uncommon either. But let's just say that's what we have. So if you just have one line that's essentially a refrain that is, the first verse, which is in one person's point of view, has its own lyrics. And then the second verse, which has another person's point of view, has totally different lyrics except for one line, right? That would be drawing a parallel between the two. And very often, again, you probably would do this first verse, last verse, to the point that many songs actually have the last verse literally repeat the first verse. It's pretty common to do something like you have verse, chorus, bridge, and then you have a miniature verse that's maybe 1-2 lines that are really just the first verse all over again, right? The first 2 lines of the song, you go back to it, and then boom, you get the chorus. And that's another way that we can sort of utilize this essentially parallelism in our lyrics. Hey friend, if you found this helpful, something else you'll likely find helpful is my free 6-step lyric writing checklist. If you want to take the overwhelm and chaos out of lyric writing, and instead you want to write precise, vivid, and intentional lyrics that you're proud of, then be sure to check this out. It's at songwritertheory.com/lyric checklist.